I am Nick Kanoki, the Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I'm excited for our Asset Leadership program today. But before we get underway, I just want to thank our patron sponsors, Definitive Logic, Onuma System, ABS Quality Evaluations, and ABS Group. Especially today, Onuma System, as we have the president and founder, Kimon Onuma, with us, who will be presenting shortly. Also, we just want to mention our organizational members. Without them, this programming and other things like our newsletter would not be possible. So thank you especially to Serco for one of our panelists' participation today. Asset Insights Management from David Albrecht. That was the animation, if you saw that at the beginning of the program. And many other organizational members. We really are grateful for their continued support, and they make this possible. And then one last
including
note,
LCE, who is also on the panel today too.
Right, life cycle engineering. Yep. Yes, again, thank you all our organizational members, as well as the Andrew James Advisory Group for launching another ALN A55K professional certification course. That starts November 8th. So if you're interested in some ISO 55000 professional development, reach out to the Andrew James Advisory Group or any of the ALN. And with that, I would just like to say, if you're out there watching, we would love to hear from you. So please send any comments, questions, or feedback to the chat or the Q&A function of the Zoom webinar. And I think, Mike, you're going to start off the program today.
Yes, thank you, Nick and Landers. Hope temperature is not too cold up there in Wyoming. I'm here in Chicago. We've got Kimon Onuma, who will be giving a presentation from Pasadena, Mildred Chua-Ulger, and I am not sure where you're at. She could be in Las Vegas. She could be in New York.
I'm in New York.
Okay. Meighan Altwies with the Serco, as we mentioned, is in the Washington area, and Jesse Rothkopf from LCE is in the Carolinas, South Carolina?
Charleston, South Carolina, yes.
Charleston, South Carolina. So I have got to say, this is the program that I was really looking forward to. Today's program is divided into two sections. The first section is on asset leadership, and Kimon Onuma will be giving a presentation. He asked me if he could talk about what leaders need to know so that they can achieve their asset management goals in a much more effective way. I was like, sure, I think we can get some people to talk about that. Mildred is a new ALN Senior Fellow, and she has recently stepped down from her role as the asset manager for the New York City Metropolitan Transit Administration. And Meighan at Serco is working with federal agencies on their information and asset management endeavors. And Jesse Rothkopf from LCE is heading up a lot of the asset management initiatives for LCE. He's involved in utilities, water and wastewater, and he is publishing with the ALN a resiliency paper. So the other reason why I like this group is because you're all relatively new members to the ALN, and I think the fact that we have these new voices is very beneficial for us. So Kimon, if you would, please start us off. Oh, before that, at the top of the hour, we're going to switch from the leadership panel. We're going to go into the transportation panel and be talking about specific asset management and asset leadership issues in transportation and transit industry. So they're very similar. It'll lead in together, but it is two separate presentations. And Kimon, will you start with your first presentation?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Let's see. Can you see my screen?
It is starting to show up, but it has not arrived yet.
Let me know what you see.
It says Kimon Onuma has started sharing screen, but we're not getting anything else yet.
Okay. Let's see.
At least I am not.
All right, I'll stop it and try it again.
So for the audience, we did try this earlier and it did work. So we have every confidence that it will get going.
There it is. Okay. How about now?
It says you are sharing your screen, but it still has not arrived.
Wow.
Is anybody else seeing it show up?
Not yet.
Huh. It says you're screen sharing and worked earlier. So let's see.
If you could, Kimon, perhaps send the presentation to Nick. Take a second, and while you're working on these technical issues, let me start off by asking each of the panelists to give themselves a little introduction. Jesse, since your microphone is on, will you go ahead and introduce yourself a
Sure.
little further?
Thanks, Mike. Jesse Rothkopf with Lifecycle Engineering. I'm the managing principal for our transportation and non-manufacturing practice. Lifecycle Engineering, we're really focused on the people and process side of asset management. We work with technology, we work with the physical assets, but we're really focused on that alignment with the people and process side of that house.
Excellent. Meighan?
Thanks, Mike. I'm Meighan Altwies, and I am the Strategic Advisor for Facilities and Asset Management for Serco. And I lead several technology implementations across my portfolio. But my focus is similar to Jesse, is also on the people and process and enabling efficiency and allowing our customers to drive that data collection so that they can better manage the limited resources they have.
Excellent. Mildred?
Yes, I am Mildred Chua-Ulger, recently retired from New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority, where I led the Enterprise Asset Management Program. I was the program executive, as well as working with the transformation team in terms of advancing the program, the asset management program. Also with the IAM as the chair of the Knowledge and Leadership Group. And of course, recently asked to join ALN as a senior fellow. Thank you very much. Really looking forward to this discussion.
Well, and then I've just got to say, Mildred was made a senior fellow last week, and this week she's already connecting us to other people who could be panelists. So good job, Mildred. Thank you for taking this
Anytime.
very seriously. All right, excellent. So Kimon is ready to go.
All right. I had to restart, but I'm here. I am. So thanks for having me. Sorry for the technical glitch here. I'm going to be talking about leaders and leadership from an architect's perspective. I'm an architect, and I've seen challenges that leaders are constantly faced with, especially in asset management and the building industry and facilities, about these stovepipes and how you connect between the different phases of a project, for example, going all the way into the life cycle. So as an architect, you put information about a building together and try and pass it on to the actual operation of the facility and the management of the assets. And there's all these stovepipes. But I also see really great things happening with technologies and platforms that allow us to communicate more efficiently. And that's what I think is the opportunity from a leader's perspective. How do we make that shift? How do we change the industry to be able to talk to each other basically more efficiently? And I think that's the opportunity that we should all be looking at. And for some reason, it stopped again. Can you guys see the screen? Okay, there we go. All right, so the leaders. Oh, okay. What's going on? Okay, let's try this one. So there's lots of different types of leaders that have inspired us, and this is not really a complete list either, and all of them have strengths and faults and weaknesses, but there's a lot of that we can learn. And one leader that I want to focus on is Admiral Thad Allen. We worked with the US Coast Guard, and this, what he said about the transparency of information breeds self-correcting behavior, really rung true with a lot of the things that we were doing, and it really drove a lot of the work that we did with the Coast Guard. So from a leader's perspective, being able to share information and give access to people to make decisions, not just about a single building, but about how a facility and an organization operates, how their facilities and assets impact their decisions, and how to be able to shift on the fly as demand changes. So as 9/11 came around, the Coast Guard's mission changed, And that has been kind of driven throughout our 30 years of using these various technologies to design, construct, operate, and work with owners to guide them through how they make their decisions about facilities and assets. So from a traditional structure, there's a leader, there's other leaders below, and there's this kind of pyramidal structure that is still around, but I think it's really starting to flatten. And the reason it's starting to flatten is because there's a lot of people across the organization that need access to information, whether they're technical or non-technical, executives, engineers, asset managers, and they all need access to information. Those stovepipes are what we're trying to break. So what we learned from that, and over the years, what we've done in my organization, we started my father had an office in Japan. I worked with him there for many years. We had an office in Pasadena in the 90s that we opened. And then in 2009 was the last time we had a traditional physical office. And I've never actually presented this slide before, but that was the last time we had it. After that, we went all virtual, and we still get together in an actual office in a like a WeWork type space. But this virtual capability of being able to work from anywhere has transformed how we as an organization and the people that we work with can interact with us. And that took some big decisions. And one thing that drove us to that was the ability to share. And I'm saying Woodstock here because we had a webinar in 2008 that's called BIMstorm, and it was all virtual. And we had hundreds of people participating from around the world. And that opened up our eyes and said, well, we've been doing this for years. Why can't we take this approach and just really go virtual with this and work with anybody in the world? And this was before COVID, right? So we were basically setting up for what everybody's pretty used to doing now with Zoom and everything, but being able to collaborate on the fly, to be resilient, to be able to support the needs. In this case, this was from the earthquake in Japan. How do we respond and even work with teams that are sending assets over for temporary housing to be able to run scenarios? No single person or no single organization or no single tool has all the answers, but when you connect the dots, then you're able to collaborate and do amazing things. And that's what I've learned over the years, is that this ability to be fearless, to share, to be able to respond quickly, and to be able to adjust on the fly is so important. And the standards that the asset leadership talks about and supports are critical to all of this. The standards that we have become used to working with over the years, that we went from these standalone devices to be able to communicate from 2008. Absolutely everything changed about the world. We're able to use all these apps and communicate. So why not bring this capability into facilities and assets, using standards to drive this innovation, to be able to collaborate, to create an equitable way to manage the equity that we have in assets across the organization, across people, across the world, and to keep it simple. It has to be simple. There's so much complexity in our industry that we must keep it simple, and we must be able to connect to what owners are thinking about, for example, and to now here's a physical asset and the facility and the portfolio that you're managing. That connection requires keeping things simple. So what Einstein once said is life is like riding a bicycle. You have to keep your balance and keep on moving. Einstein was a very smart guy, so I'm sure he could dissect the bike and really describe all the inner workings of it and get very scientific about how things work. And we tend to really all gravitate toward this complexity, but in the end, we really want to ride that bike. And I think it's really important from a leadership perspective, just talk less and actually start doing things. It's a much more agile environment now where you can actually start making impact with the assets and information and technologies that you have and create those connections. Just ride the bike. And how will you lead? I guess that's my question as we're heading into this discussion. How will we, as the Asset Leadership Network and in this webinar, how will we help others lead? And when I ran into the Asset Leadership Network, just the word leadership is in the title. And there are leaders across this Restructuring America presentation and in the Asset Leadership Network that are making huge changes. And that's what's really exciting to me about today. So thank you very much. And hopefully that you're able to see my screen.
We did, and you did not hear us laughing when you put up the Dear Leader slide. That was a great one, but all of us were chuckling. Actually, since you have this slide deck, can you go to do you have the classical column slide?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, this was something that Kimon gave in a presentation yesterday morning, and I've seen him do this before. And he draws the connection between the classical orders of architecture and what needs to be done now. There have always been templates for designing a better approach. And the ISO 55000 asset management structure is a template for leaders to use to create a structure for their organization that creates incredible benefits. But Kimon, before we go on to the other speakers or the other panelists, if you had one thing to tell leaders what to do to improve their organization, what is it that you would tell them?
I think it's to leaders need to create that continuity, and we've had a lot of challenges with the large owners that we work with, that as leadership changes, even though you have made these great ideas, how do you keep the people rallying around those decisions, the decisions that are fragile that you need to keep going? So having that leadership capability and giving the strength and the ability for everybody in the organization to actually be a leader. You don't have to think only in that pyramidal structure. Obviously, you need an actual leader at the top and everything, but that flattening is what's really exciting, I think, from an organizational perspective, to be able to drive that throughout the organization and to drive change.
Okay.
So here's a slide. I don't know if this is the one you were thinking about, Mike.
We're just still seeing the leaders building informed environments slides.
Oh, well,
Don't worry about that. Everybody can understand a classical Greek temple with the columns that make it look so structurally sound and wonderful. Yeah, so all of the things in terms of flattening the structure as in a template has been part of human process forever.
yeah.
So thank you for sharing that, Kimon.
Thanks.
And next we'll go to Mildred, because Mildred has recently stepped down from the corporate world. I think she is going to be able to speak her mind in a free way. And again, welcome to being an ALN Senior Fellow.
Yes.
What message do you have for leaders who want to embark on an asset management journey?
So I've worked for so many great leaders. I mean, I can throughout my career. And when it comes to asset management, it's not necessarily understood in the way that it should be understood, right? It's seen as a very technical discipline. It's only about maintenance. It's only about engineering, depending on what your perspective is, right? When in reality, it is really about, it's a strategic field, right? It really is about integrating and connecting all the different disciplines so that you could achieve the mission of your organization, right? And that you can provide the level of service that you are promising your customers. So when organizations talk about customer service all the time, like, oh, one of our big goals is really customer service. How do you enable that? How do you make sure that you're actually able to provide that level of customer service that you are promising to deliver, right? And so you need number one, your organization to be structured in such a way that the silos are able to communicate. And the best way to do that is through data. Kimon had presented information and information sharing, different platforms. Technology now is able to build all these systems that allow you to pull information and harness the institutional knowledge of an organization, so that when leaders do leave and the next generation comes forward, they're not starting from scratch. you have in front of you sort of the blueprint to continue building upon in terms of continuous improvement, and nothing is lost. And I think that is where I think leaders need to focus on and understand that when they are restructuring, they're building their new organization, they want to leave their mark on the organization, right? Knowing they're not going to be there forever, build it, people, process, tools, technology, you integrate them, put in place these architectural frameworks that when you have your data consolidated to feed into these frameworks, it doesn't matter who comes and goes, it's available for the future to continue to expand and improve and so forth.
Excellent. So what that leads to is the discussion of policy and how policy is needed so that if there is leadership change, the organization can continue. Mildred, can you talk about that a little bit before we go on to Jesse on that subject?
Well, I mean, the policy, I mean, ideally, organizations, I mean, should have like an asset management policy, right? That actually talks about what do we need to have in place, right? As we move forward, depending on, it doesn't matter which perspective you're coming from, it's financial, engineering, maintenance, there is a policy that governs how you carry out your actions, how you make decisions, right? Is to embed that thinking process of the asset management process into all the decision making that goes on. So the policy governs that. The MTA, where I came from, does have an asset management policy, but that policy also should not be static, right? It's something that needs to be updated over time. I mean, a policy that was written for asset management 2-3 years ago really needs to be looked at now in light of the pandemic, right? And what is needed in order for an organization to be sustainable and resilient moving forward.
So would you, would you recommend that if there is a leadership change, that the first thing they do is address policy as a form of continuity?
Yes, like, I mean, anyone stepping in would say, number one, is there a policy, right? And if there isn't a policy, let's take a look at it, because it is where you begin your strategic planning process. So the asset management policy is one of many policies in an organization, right? And other policies tend to get looked at right away for some reason, but asset management does not. Right. And but in reality, it is so strategic to really make sure that you incorporate the asset management policy into all of your planning processes to make sure that all your assets, whether it's financial assets, people assets, physical assets, data, intellect, everything, tangible and intangible assets of the organization can be governed by this policy. And it allows you to have a framework to think about you know, what you need to be doing as you put in place your planning process for managing these assets.
So Mildred is also on the ALN Advancing Equity with Asset Leadership Committee, and one of the other members, Chris Silke from the City of Portland, contributed to the City of Portland having an asset management policy. And because of his involvement in our group, the asset management policy is heavy with equity issues. It could almost double as an equity policy also. So we're very proud, and we've got that on our website if anybody wants to see that. So Jesse, can you talk about policy strategy and continuing leadership?
Sure. Mildred hit on so many great points there. You know, I think when you were talking about bringing alignment into the people and the process and the tools or technology and bringing those into alignment with the physical assets. You know, if you're looking at public infrastructure, these are really asset intensive organizations, and bringing those 4 pillars into alignment, people, process, technology, and physical assets. In my mind, that's the main role of the organizational leader, to build that culture, to help further the alignment of those 4 pillars. And the asset management policy is, it's part of the ISO 55000 way of looking at things. It allows for that line of sight throughout the organization and gives everybody from top to bottom in the organization a straight line of sight as to what those policies are, how they relate to the policy, how they relate to those assets, what their role is in maintaining those assets throughout the life cycle, and actually optimizing them to meet the goals of that policy. And then hopefully that policy should be in direct alignment with the organizational strategy and mission. So I think, sometimes I've seen the leaders, sometimes the leaders lead and sometimes they also follow. And when you're setting those policies, it really helps to talk to some people that understand how all these assets and all these tools and the people within the organization all fit together, and then kind of coalesce that policy, get a little bit of input, and then put a stamp of approval on that policy. The leader of the organization themselves does not have to come up with that policy all by themselves. It's really a function of the culture of the organization. So sometimes those leaders are following the people that they're working with. They're establishing that policy vocally. They're building it with active and visible leadership throughout the organization to further that culture.
Excellent. Meighan, would you like to contribute to the thoughts on policy and strategy?
Absolutely. I had the great pleasure of writing a strategic asset management plan for a customer over the last few months, and working with them in refining their position and where they're at and where they're going. And it is exactly what Jesse said. It's that idea of building the collaboration and the communication channels. And it was interesting going up and down the stakeholder chain, top to bottom, across the board, matrixed, and seeing those connections, but also exposing those to the teams I worked with in the organization, so that they actually all saw their parts. It was a great tool to break down the silos. It also exposed where they were doing well. And I think one of the things that the leaders tend to have at times is, I've got a vision, I know where I want to go, but how well am I, objectively meeting that vision? And so using the ISO 55000 template was a great way to say, hey, you're really doing great in these areas, and here's your map to improve. And having that template, it was informative, it was collaborative, it was communicative, and it enabled the vision to leap forward. Secondly, I think the people and process part of it is so much of the life cycle of ISO 55000 that there isn't enough time to be put in. I mean, you could put all your time in that and make great strides. And the technology and asset pieces are really kind of beneficial at the end of that time. When you invest in your people and your process, you make the gains for the value of the organization. And so I think ISO 55000 enabled a culture change in the organization I was working with most recently, and across to all of my customers. It's that the idea of adopting the collaboration, that end goal of getting to a better state of managing your facilities and assets for the long term, which is enabling value for everybody. So if I'm the technician on the ground, turning the wrench, I know my contribution is contributing to that. I know that when I can identify something before it fails, and my leadership knows to listen to me because they value my input, that whole connection right there is really the benefit that drives the end result.
Excellent. And since you are fresh off of this SAMP experience, can you share any insights on what the leader of that organization did that you think would be beneficial for others to replicate?
So two things. One was he embedded training first and foremost of what asset management was up and down his whole organization. Everyone was invested in understanding what asset management was and how they contributed. Institute of Asset Management and just general knowledge that they were acquiring through multiple channels on what asset management was and how the organization was moving forward. That training was just off the charts. everyone I talked to was embracing that culture, and that was really awesome. The other thing they did, especially because they're a federal customer, is they embraced the contract language of asset management into their contracts, so that when they did let a contract for, even if it's for, services like custodial or other services they typically let out, it was embedded there. What data was required to be shared? That was informative of the whole cycle, so that they could adequately document everything along the way. And so those two pieces were key in helping them realize they actually had made a great leap forward. They had the enthusiasm of their team, and where they needed to make changes were actually fine-tuning the processes they had versus drastically changing. And so that was actually insightful for the leader, because he thought he had to make a huge shift to achieve an ISO 55000, when instead he just really needed to keep making incremental improvements.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That is definitely something that other leaders would appreciate hearing. So Kimon, I would like us to take the gloves off now and have everybody tell a leadership horror story, because leaders can learn as much from others' failures as from their successes. And I know you don't like to speak bad of anyone, so Kimon, you don't have to name any names or anything, but I'm thinking of an organization that you talked with 10 years ago. They didn't go with you, and then 10 years later, they came back to you and said, oh, okay, now let's do that thing that you were talking about. Now, you don't have to talk about that one, but, oh, and I do want to mention, thank you for putting Admiral Allen on the screen, because we're talking with him and he might give the keynote on November 10th in the morning if everything works out well.
Wonderful. Yeah, so that I won't name the names, Mike, but it's actually a recurring theme that I'm hearing. And we are a technology company too, so we understand the technology, but I've seen a lot of things over the years where leaders get sold, or an organization gets sold on a technology. It's kind of that shiny object thing. Look at this new thing that you can buy, that you can just plug in and everything's going to work great. They get it and then they realize, wow, that really didn't work out that great. And a lot of the older technologies are built around trapping the information in their ecosystem. That's just their business. It has nothing to do with the technology. It has more with the business strategy of trapping it. And government organizations, because they've been using technology for many years, are constantly struggling with this, including internal technologies. So that trapping and not sharing the information out of fear, or out of, if we keep this ourselves and it's more valuable for us, and we keep on selling it over and over again. And that's a very dangerous place to be in. And that's where the transparency comes in, I think. And that's what Admiral Allen actually pushed on. If you say everything has to be transparent, then you can get to it and decide where's the authoritative source. You reduce duplication, you flatten the field, and you don't have to spend as much. It's actually a fraction of the, it should be a lot of this stuff. The technology's become so easy to build now. It should be disposable. The software is disposable. There's absolutely no reason to treat that as an asset. The true asset is the stuff that you put inside it. And if it's trapped in the technology, it's the wrong solution. And we just need to be just out there. We need to talk about it, because it's not talked about enough. It's always about, look at these shiny objects that we can buy. And I've seen failure after failure, and some of them, yes, have taken decades where they come back and say, yeah, this thing that you told us 10 years ago, well, we've burned through millions and now we're going to go back to starting over pretty much. But that's a challenge, I think. There's a lot of very valuable data and assets that organizations already have. Get that open, put it in the right spot, and start generating value from that. And ask every single solution that you buy or build in-house, how do I get my data out of your application when I want to leave you? And if they don't have a good answer, it's time to run the other way.
Okay, that's a highlight clip right there, Nick. Anyway, what you're talking about is human. It's human for us to want to take a pill to make us better. We just want a simple solution, make it go. But that's not how a complex organization can work. So Jesse, do you have any examples of companies that thought they were buying the solution to everything, and you had to go back in there and explain them that there's people processes involved in this also?
Exactly. I have many examples of that, and without naming any names, it really does often come down to the people and the process side of the house. There are so many tools out there, and a lot of them do the same thing. It's really how you engage with those tools and making sure that they're in alignment, again, with the people in the process to support those physical assets. We've seen a lot of organizations that have spent a lot of money on like a new CMMS, a new computerized maintenance management system, and thinking that might, it is an essential piece for them to transform the way that they manage their assets. It's absolutely correct. But we've had one instance that the program just was not nearly as successful as it could have been, because the client said, we don't really need the change management piece. I will tell my people what they need to do and they will do that. Well, that is not the way it works in most organizations. It does not matter how strong leader you are. If the people don't know how to use the tool, if they're not willing to use the tool, if they're not willing to engage with the people that are implementing the tool, you're going to have problems. You really need to engage that change management throughout the entire process. So in general, I would say, the horror stories usually center around that change management piece not being present or not being present enough. And then I have a couple other tales where, just changes in leadership in the midst of a transition within an organization, a public utility that I dealt with recently, where the outgoing leader was looking to make a legacy on asset management. The new leader coming in said, well, we're actually doing pretty well with our assets right now. We don't have any problems. Let's just continue doing what we're doing. And it works for them right now, but 5 or 10 years down the road, this is a public utility. Those assets are going to age. There's not a lot of money to replace them. They have to get their asset management program and their people aligned with that program right now, or they're going to really face disastrous problems down the road.
That's very interesting. And it almost begs the question if a language in the contract should say that if there's a change in leadership, this asset management system will, take a reset, will do X, Y, Z or whatever. So go ahead, Jesse.
Well, I would say that there's two sides to that. Asset management should survive a leadership change. I know Mildred and some of the people that were working in the MTA in those strategic roles set the asset management program up from the very beginning. They worked really, really hard to, Mildred as well, to set that up so that it could not fail. Once that the train left the station, it was not coming back. They had to continue with the program. So I think you have to build that asset management policy, that strategic asset management plan, so that it does survive a leadership change. Now, when there is a change in leadership, you really have to make sure that those incoming leaders understand it and they know who to go to, and they don't necessarily have to manage that whole program themselves. They just need to know where to turn.
So Mildred, we need to give you equal time.
So I'm going to piggyback off of that, as Jesse has started about the MTA, because that is where I come from, right? And the leadership changes are all too frequent. I mean, they are really, right now we just, had another change in leadership, which means that, the asset management program has been going through, a very tough time in terms of surviving, and it goes back to people. As long as there are people in the organization that believe in it, that are continuing the good work that's going on, right? And promoting it and recording everything and keeping it somewhere and that they can share, I think it will live on. Personally, from my perspective, I was part of the planning for the transformation plan that has now been sort of slowed down at the MTA. I really helped to embed asset management principles and ISO 55000 into every corner of that transformation plan, right? To make sure that even if it was cherry picked in the future, that only certain aspects of it were going to be implemented, you will always have a sprinkling of ISO 55000 embedded in it. It's just hard to get rid of when you put it in the foundation of a blueprint. And I think so that is really, really key. And then the leaders need to be convinced. They think so differently. Everything is about the triple bottom line. When you speak to them, that language of the triple bottom line of what is sustainability, financial, right? All of those things is really what they want to hear. How do you translate technical asset management and outcomes into those triple bottom line items? Because if you can't do that, they can't hear you. And I think that's the struggle of leaders in asset management, right? Is that they're unable to grasp what that means. And if it doesn't ring a bell, if the CFO doesn't understand how financially asset management and all those practices are really good for the bottom line, I mean, they'll never fund your program. And that has always been sort of where I know personally from my experience where we were. And I was able to convince our CFO at the time when I was leading the program that we have a continuous improvement program that was continuously bringing in benefits and financial savings. And they had to see it. It was buried somewhere in the financial plan. But without him ever seeing that, you know, he thought nothing was ever happening. So it's like an aha moment when I said, no, look, all here. But as a CFO, I spoke to him as a CFO from a financial perspective, as opposed from an asset management perspective or an engineering perspective. So I think communication is key, being able to really get our leaders to think in the same way and understand maybe not completely what asset management is, but really understand what it means to them as leaders, right? And the bottom line, the triple bottom line for their organization.
We are finding that the CFO is key to the organizational
Right.
change that can happen with asset management structured approach. And we're starting a relationship with the Government Finances Officers Association, and we're really looking forward to that. They said that they want to bring this message to their members. So, Meighan, how are you doing?
Oh, good. So I've got several stories of clients, going back to the original question about clients that maybe were misinformed on their vision and how they were executing it. And it goes back to what Jesse said about training and not having that change management embedded in the process. That's a key thing I've seen many times that causes things to not go well. And then secondly, it's that disconnect of the senior leaders, like the CFOs, and understanding that the investment is not just a snap of the finger, all magic wand, it's fixed. It's a long-term investment for the good of the organization. And you can't stop it midstream. And so educating the senior leaders that they need to have that data consistently improving and gathered and improving processes to get to the place where they can see their vision happening is probably the biggest struggle. And when you have misinformed leaders, they kill a program and then they come back to you later to resurrect it again. You know, so it's that ability to communicate up. And so those two things are the biggest things that drive the areas where people struggle and fail.
Okay, so that brings up something I've said before. The ALN has presented at the National Academy of Sciences numerous times, and I wish we could present at the National Academy of Human Behavioral Sciences, because the more we get into this, the more I realize it's about that communication with the leading people, like Mildred explained. You know, do other people have stories? Kimon, perhaps you have something that you were able to present information to leaders in a way that helped them understand how to go forward?
Yeah, maybe this goes back to the complexity thing. Because of all this complexity, you have to break it down into bite-sized pieces. You have to be able to tell the story and connect with them. In fact, I have the Lego thing up here. There's a little Lego truck up there that I carried around with me to a meeting with the Department of Defense. And we explained how all this stuff comes together with Legos. And I just had that truck and I shoved it across the table and said, it's just like this truck. You could pull it apart and put it back together again. But if you break it into bite-sized pieces, and it's this, the story is so critical, because if we go back to the human factor in this, it's not all the whiz bang technology. And a lot of us, and especially in the technology and even the architectural world, we love that complexity. Now, I still love it too, but yeah, if you can't tell the simple story, then nothing really matters in the end.
So did they go forward with the Lego truck project, or what happened there?
Yeah, a lot of it went forward. A lot of it got stuck in other places, but that's natural. But yeah, we actually were able to implement. We actually used this approach where we said, okay, you have data about healthcare facilities. It's stuck in a black box. There's nothing secret about how you build hospitals. Put it on the web and make it accessible to the world. Then everybody can access the same information versus, oh, we're going to give you a PDF or an Excel file of how we build hospitals, which is ridiculous in this day and age. It should be just data flowing out. So we said, just put it out there, then people will do amazing things with it. And that takes the vision again, that, it's kind of this knee-jerk reaction to everything is secret or confidential. Yes, it is. But if it's all in the same black box and all of a sudden things leak out and there's this whole cybersecurity issue thing, how do you classify things, which goes back to standardization, to be able to say, what do we want to share with who, when, what do we want to protect? And how do we make it simple enough to consume and use by anybody, not just by a single application or a single use?
A very interesting leadership story, one that Kimon has used, I'll ask him to tell again, is about the way all of the GIS information finally was opened up.
It's in my next slide deck. We don't have to tell it now.
Oh, okay. So that's coming up in transportation, but just for those who aren't going to be able to stick around for the transportation part of the presentation, Ronald Reagan, after a Korean Airlines was mistakenly shot down by Russians, Ronald Reagan opened up the Department of Defense GIS information for everybody in the world to use, including the enemies, so that accidents like that could not happen. That's what created the GIS explosion.
Yeah.
Jesse, do you have any stories about getting through to leaders in a human manner to help them make right decisions?
Yeah. One of the things that we tell leaders is, a lot of leaders, when you're dealing with asset management, they're really focused on the assets and they're really focused on the technology around those assets. Implementing the technology it's difficult, but that's not the most difficult thing. Getting the assets to optimize, that really is a cultural thing that comes when all those pillars are in alignment. What we try to tell our main stakeholders, our executive leaders on the projects, is that the soft stuff is the hard stuff. The soft stuff of trying to do the change management, getting everybody engaged, following that ISO 55,000 line of sight so that everybody in the organization understands their role in this transformative project. That's the really hard part. And it actually doesn't need to be that hard. It's, there's plenty of templates out there. There's organizational change management templates with ProSci, with many other different providers, that if you follow that, it's not that difficult, but you just need to make sure that you're building that into any type of transformative project.
Okay, so we have talked about things to avoid. Let me phrase this, and Meighan, I'll ask you first. When do you know you have a good leader that you're working with? Or can you share an example of a time when you heard something that a client, a leader from a client said, and you're like, okay, this is going to go well?
So absolutely. I know I have a good leader when they come to me with ISO 55000 as their plan. When they come to me and say, I know this is what data I have, I know this is where I need to go, and this is the steps I'm going to go through to get there. When they are that engaged and that thoughtful, I know this is going to go well because they're ready for any challenge that's going to come up. And they've thought, they know it's complex. They know it's going to be incremental. They know it's going to take time. And they've thought about that investment, and they're already advocating to make sure they have the right amount of funding and resources available to achieve it. So I have a couple of clients right now in that mode who know exactly what they want to do, where they want to go. They know it's going to take time, but they do their homework. They understand what they have, and they understand what they need. And starting from that place and knowing that getting to that next level of data, next level of process, next level of people optimization will take investment, will take communication, will take time. I know it'll be fine. And those are my favorite engagements.
Wow, I think we can end now. Can't say anything better than that. No, I'm kidding. Mildred, you're not in the same kind of consulting role, but I want to say you were with the MTA for 30 plus
4
years.
Yes,
Wow.
34 years. Yes.
Wow. So you saw a lot of leadership change.
I did.
And that's why you say we, even though you're not there anymore, you're still saying
Right.
we.
I say
Because
we. I know. I got to really watch myself with that.
it's in your blood. It's in your
right.
blood.
Well, I want to continue on Meighan's statement about leaders, right? I did work for one who was probably the most asset management oriented. I mean, it was a brief time. He was president at Bridges and Tunnels. He came in and he got it. He had seen me presenting on asset management for the MTA in several venues like IBTTA, and he really was so into it. So when he became president of TBTA, he did ask me, he said, listen, we're gonna rebuild this organization after cashless tolling was implemented, right? It's a huge change in our operating model. Let's start strategically. And part of that strategy really is about asset management. How do we manage our assets, our different types of assets, and looking at the asset management policy and reinforcing that, right? And making that really drive, you know, our new, what we call a customer-centric model for tolling. And I think, you know, and that's what it is. He came to me to say, this is what I want. And everything that he said, all his presentations, his plans, they never mentioned asset management, but you could tell if you're an asset manager and you're familiar with ISO 55000, you will see it. You will recognize it in everything. So I know what it's like to actually have a true sponsor who's willing to take it. And he even said, talk to us in 5 years and you will see my organization really, truly, fully aligned around this, right? He was bold enough to make that statement. Of course, he didn't stay that long. He retired after about a year or two. So we never really got to finish it. I moved on to headquarters to do other things. So, but I do know the difference when you do have that leader and that sponsor that really will have that passion to share with you, and you're happy to do it with them.
Go ahead, say his name.
Cedric Fulton.
Good man, Cedric.
It's really, really, I owe him a lot of what I did at Bridges and Tunnels for that support. His predecessors were also strongly supportive, but because he was an operations oriented person, he came from the operations side, and he said to me, you're a financial person, I'm operations, let's align. That's the alignment of the organization, operations to the board, which is financial. And if we can align that, that is, you know, ISO 55000. So
there's another highlight. This is great. Sorry, Jesse, but you got to follow these.
How am I going to do that? Mildred just dropped the mic. No, I remember when Mr. Fulton was there, and actually that's when I met Mildred and David Kraft and a few other people at Bridge and Tunnel.
I remember.
Oh yeah, and I actually remember it was really, as a consultant, it was a joy to talk to people that said, yeah, we get it. We want it. We really want this for our organization. We're investing in it. And, you know, the good leaders that I've seen are looking at, they're asking questions like, who do I need to bring into this discussion? Do I need my procurement people? Do I need my storeroom people? Yes, the answer is yes. You need the whole organization. Asset management touches everything, and they're not asking, how soon can I get this done? Can we be done in, do you have a template that we could be done in 3 weeks? No. So they're really looking at how this is going to be a continuous improvement opportunity to optimize the business over a long period of time. And those same leaders are typically building leaders underneath them that are going to take the mantle and run with it, and build that persistent culture of reliability within the organization, and also a persistent culture of competence, asset management competence. So they're investing in training. They don't shortchange that part. Though, again, back to the change management, they're investing in the training and getting the people and the process sides aligned with the physical assets and the technology.
Excellent. So, Kimon, can I ask you to share a Thad Admiral Allen story? This one's going back to when you kind of first started, and there wasn't a lot of interaction with you and your contract, and then Admiral Allen made a statement, and people started asking you for lunch. Do you remember that one, or should I?
There was a lot of them. Is it about the value of their information and compared to the facilities? Is that the one you're talking about?
How if he didn't get what he wanted, he would disband the entire.
Oh, yeah. So that's a leader that kind of pushes options there, right?
Yes.
It's a cheerleader approach, I guess, but it works. And we've seen it from other leaders as well. Amazon had the same thing.
So go ahead and give a little more detail there.
Oh, I don't know how much more detail I could give, but yeah, if you have a statement like that and you give an option of how you can respond to it, and the leader kind of sets the stage, then we look at how can we, it goes back to that transparency thing. So then as we started collecting information about their assets and facilities, then you can immediately notice who's actually interacting and using that information. So it's that human thing again there, but also the fear factor. And giving an opening that gives an opportunity to move forward, I think, is also an important part.
Well, basically what he had said, but Kimon had started working for the Coast Guard and was not really getting traction with the manager level. And then all of a sudden, Admiral Allen had an all hands meeting and said, if the engineering department did not help improve the mission of the Coast Guard, he would disband the entire 600-person engineering department and outsource the services to anyone in the world who could help him improve the mission of the Coast Guard. And suddenly Kimon started getting calls for lunch and get together and all these other things. He really motivated them. So we've got 2 minutes. Let's go around and let everyone wrap up. Meighan, why don't you go ahead and start?
Mike, thank you so much for the invitation to the panel today. It's been a great fun to discuss asset management with such passionate people. So thank you for the time today.
Thank you. Your contributions are going to make some great highlights. Jesse?
I echo what Meighan just said, and it's really fun being part of this discussion at this level. Glad to be a participant and on the panel with you all.
Thank you. Mildred?
Yes, thank you again for the opportunity. Really enjoyed this discussion, and it's amazing how much you can go back in time and remember some of these great examples of do's and don'ts that just crystallizes as you're listening to others. So I'm learning a lot, and I'm able to disprove certain things that I have seen through my career in my former place of employment. So yeah.
Well, thank you, because you're making such great contributions. I'm glad you're getting something out of this also.
Thank you.
Kimon?
Oh yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for sitting through my slides as I try to start them up. And it was great interacting with everybody.
Yeah, thank you all for this. As I said, I was really looking forward to it, and there are some really good examples we'll be able to share with other leaders. And I bet you the results of this conference, this web program will echo for many years.